Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've got a really exciting announcement. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Hannah Cox, and I'm the National Manager of Conservatives Concern about the death penalty. Conservatives Concern started organically in Montana a number of years ago by a group of pro-life conservatives who were working around Republican politics and felt very strongly that pro-life views ought to expand all the way from birth through the natural death of a person. And so they started organizing under this title, and it caught on really quickly. They found out that there were a lot of conservatives who shared that belief and had not really had a place to organize around the subject matter previously. So we went national in 2012, and we've been growing ever since then. We've got state chapters across the country. We've been very involved in several repeal campaigns, most recently in New Hampshire, where we actually were part of overturning the death penalty in that state, even overriding a governor's veto this year. And we have a lot of exciting things coming up in the next couple of sessions as well. So we're finding that more and more Republicans are not only coming out against the death penalty, but are really championing this. They're sponsoring pieces of legislation, and they're really actually leading the way. New Hampshire would not have happened this year without a substantial number of Republicans sponsoring the Republican lawmakers sponsoring death penalty repeal bills in the states. In 2000, that was pretty rare. You only had a handful of people that you could point to. By 2016, we'd seen that number increase 10 times. And last year, or actually this year, we had 11 states alone that had Republican-sponsored pieces of legislation to repeal the death penalty. So we're seeing a real uptake. We're now down to only 25 states in the country that still have the death penalty. Of those, over a third have not used it in a decade or more. New death sentences are down 60% since 2000. And last year was the fourth in a row that the country carried out fewer than 30 executions. All of those were in only 8 states, and more than half of them were in Texas alone. So not only is usage down, but it's very heavily concentrated. I think across the country, we're seeing those on both the right and left are realizing the death penalty is a failed big government program. There are many issues of innocence within the system. It's not a deterrent. It's got a real problem when it comes to who gets the death penalty. It's very random and arbitrary in nature. There's a lot of socioeconomic and racial bias that also we see in the data for sentencing. And it's costly. It's the most expensive part of the criminal justice system on a per offender basis. And that's problematic not just because it's wasteful, but it's an opportunity cost. That's money that we're not spending on programs that actually could work to deter crime, and it's money that we're not spending on solving more crimes, which we actually do very little of in this country. So for all of these reasons, conservatives are gathering and calling for an end to the death penalty. And what we've seen is that there's been a tremendous response to this at the state level. The federal government, about 2 months ago, announced that it plans to restart executions for the first time in 16 years. This is in direct contrast to where conservatives and a lot of Republicans are on this issue at the state level. We think that this is a sign that the administration is really out of step with where the country is going on criminal justice reform. And we are calling for them to halt those executions. We've seen that in the absence of executions over those 16 years, crime has decreased. This is not something that we need to do, and it's not something that the most of the country is wanting to continue to pursue. Due to that, we are announcing our list of 250 conservatives within the party that have come out against the death penalty and signed our statement of support. So we have thousands of supporters across this country, but this is a list of people who actually have some type of role within the party, within different Republican organizations or libertarian groups, and have signed a statement of support calling for the end of the death penalty in America. So that statement will be made public on our website. You can go and comb through it. We've got a lot of really awesome people and transformative leaders who have been really involved at the state level, and I hope that the federal government heeds this call. So we will be talking to a few of those right now that have signed our list. I'd like to introduce them and let them tell you a bit about why they've gotten involved and what they're doing on this issue. So I'll start with Representative Neeraj Antani from Ohio.
Thanks, Hannah, for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining. Like Hannah said, my name is Neeraj Antani. I'm a state representative from Ohio, and I am against the death penalty for the repeal of the death penalty. 5 years ago, when I joined the legislature, I sponsored a bill becoming the first Republican to do so in Ohio to repeal the death penalty. I am pro-life from conception until natural death. I believe in that strongly. And so, I think that as we work within the Republican Party, the more and more people think about their position on the death penalty, I think that more and more realize it is the pro-life thing to do, whether maybe they're only pro-life for innocent life, but even still, we see the number of exonerations of people who've been wrongfully convicted, and even the chance of someone being put to death who could be innocent, I believe, for pro-life people across the country is enough to oppose the death penalty. But, more than that, we as Republicans, we don't trust government to run our health care. So we certainly, I don't know why we would trust government to put us to death. And so, I think that a small government view is another compelling argument. But, over the last 5 years, I think we've seen, the evolution, especially in other states, but, also in Ohio, we've added a few more legislators who are against the death penalty. But, we're really pushing, fellow Republicans to think about it. And especially, at least in Ohio, given the state of the death penalty, our state is not able to acquire the drugs necessary for lethal injection. And so executions have been on pause for a while. The governor just announced last week that the December execution will likely also be paused because they can't find the drugs. So, whether it's you're pro-life or for, small and limited government, at the end of the day, the death penalty isn't working. And so, we're going to push for full repeal here in Ohio, and also, help anyone across the country as they do the same.
Thank you, Representative Antani. Next, I'm going to go to Representative Jared Olson in Wyoming.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, as Hannah said, I'm Jared Olson. I'm in Cheyenne. I represent the 11th District in downtown Cheyenne. Last year, I introduced a bill to repeal the death penalty in Wyoming. And that's actually a consistent thing that has occurred in Wyoming for the last few sessions, but it hasn't had traction. And then in 2019, early 19, when we introduced this bill, we not only got it out of committee and onto the floor, but we got it through one chamber and failed in our partner chamber in the Senate by just a couple of votes. And so real close. What's really exciting about the repeal of the death penalty in Wyoming is how organic it is. The genesis of the bill actually came not from me, but from groups in Cheyenne and across Wyoming. And what I really like to tell people about that is how unique the group is that brought the death penalty forward. They are liberal, they are conservative, they are Republican, they are Democrat, they are progressive, they are libertarian. And so the group that's working to repeal the death penalty from the ground up outside of the legislature is just a tremendous group of people that span the spectrum. And I think that really helped with our success because even though Wyoming is a state that is super majority Republican, we have out of 90 legislators, only 12 Democrats in the entire state of Wyoming. The reality is that the makeup of our legislature is very diverse across the political spectrum, the ideological spectrum rather. And so, so to watch the people coalesce behind the bill, it was phenomenal. The number one driving factor in Wyoming has been costs. The fiscal issue is real in Wyoming. The cost that we see, that we appropriate annually is just over $1 million, even though we haven't had an execution for decades. And we actually haven't had anyone on death row for virtually decades as well. But we continue to appropriate the money and we do spend it in death penalty trials. So the cost is real to Wyoming. And so the efforts to repeal are going to continue in Wyoming. We're going to move forward in 2020 with the efforts to repeal. One of the unfortunate things about Wyoming, when you want to bring a bill like that in what we have is called a budget session, is that the bar is now higher in Wyoming. So in 2020, the death penalty will have to pass an introductory vote, which is a 2/3 vote just before we can vote on it. So before we can actually hear it. We are actually only 1 or 2 votes away from that right now. So we believe we're going to have the introductory vote. But that is a challenge that we're prepared to take for a lot of the reasons that my good friend from Ohio had mentioned. You know, the small government aspect is definitely a driving force. He mentioned healthcare and how we can't trust our government to carry out healthcare. I like to reference the post office. a lot. You know, I recently had a package delivered a few months ago, and I came home and the note on my door said we couldn't get through your gate, and I don't even have a gate. And so that when a post office something so simple as delivering your mail is that ineffective, it blows my mind that any American would want to trust the justice system with matters of life and death. So I think it's an opportunity to shine on fiscal responsibility, on limited government, certainly being across the board consistent with pro-life matters, but also just to lead. I'm extremely troubled by the Department of Justice's decision to move forward with executions, particularly in a time where on the world stage, a lot of the policies that are coming out of our government are actually starting to make sense as we deal with other nation states. And this one just doesn't make sense. It puts us in categories with nations like North Korea, where we just simply don't stand when it comes to our values. So I think if the states can lead, hopefully the federal government will follow. So excited to see efforts go forward in Wyoming and other states, certainly like my friend in Ohio, but all across the board would like to erase those remaining 25 states. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you, Representative Olson. Definitely really exciting things happening in Wyoming and Ohio, and I know we'll talk about that in a moment, but you guys have been doing some great work. And again, we really hope the federal government would follow the lead of conservatives on the ground where they've been going for some time on this. Next, I'm going to go to Darcy Van Orden in Utah.
Darcy, you're still on mute, so we can't hear you.
Yes, I'm Darcy Van Orden. I am the state director for Conservatives Concerned with the Death Penalty, along with the founder of the Utah Justice Coalition. And this is a very important issue for me. I first got interested in this back in college. I went to George Mason University, where I studied criminology and got my degree. And I would say that is where I started to really study and learn about this issue and really have my conversion. I grew up in a very traditional conservative home. I would say that often, the ideas behind that were often, we're tough on crime. And it was in college where, as I studied these issues, I became aware that first and foremost, it's not a deterrent. Criminologists agree on that issue, but that's really also where I sat down and thought through my own personal belief system. As a conservative, I really believe in the most limited government. So as a result, I had to think, well, if I don't trust government to have its hands in all these different aspects of my life, why would I trust them to put people to death? And so that's really an area that I thought through very heavily, along with being a Christian, along with being a pro-life person. As I thought through this topic more and more, it just didn't make sense to me anymore. I really felt strongly that, I don't want government to play God, right? I don't want government to have that ability to put people to death. I really feel strongly that this fundamentally puts us as a society, creates a culture of violence. And that's something that I very much wish to get away from. So as I thought through that issue more and more, it made more sense to me that how could I trust them to do this? And so I really fundamentally cannot. And then beyond that, a lot of other issues arose. As I studied it more, I found that, innocence is a major factor here. You're looking at statistics, longstanding statistics of, over 4% of people are absolutely innocent, but even more so, more recent studies have shown that, 1 in 10 people are later exonerated on death row after they've been convicted. And so the results of that are, we're looking at least 10% are innocent. And those are just numbers from people who've had the ability to have an organization like the Innocence Project assist them in proving their innocence, which is often not the case. And as I looked further and further, just so many other issues came up surrounding it, how arbitrary it is in its nature, where you have situations where it's not truly the most egregious crimes. It's oftentimes, the greater factors have to do with, do you have, where did this crime take place? Do you have a zealous prosecutor? Do they support the death penalty? The zip code in which it occurred, looking further at, was the Was the victim, potentially white versus a perpetrator who is potentially a minority? You take a lot of these things into account, and it seems like its use is absolutely disproportionate. And, whereas you have some cases that are by far more egregious, but if in fact the person had a good attorney, they end up with life without parole. And so I fundamentally have this issue in America where you're truly getting the justice you can afford in America. And so its arbitrary nature has caused me to be like, this is absolutely not something that we as a society should be doing. And as I look also further into this issue, I grapple with the idea of asking a jury, asking our peers to sentence someone to death. What that would do to somebody's life. Also looking further, asking a guard to put somebody to death. Here in Utah, just to give you an idea of the environment, in 2015, the Utah legislature brought back death by firing squad. And as somebody who, that was shocking to me. And that should be shocking to other people, because I was just like, not only do we have the death penalty here, but we're bringing back death by firing squad. This just seems like we're going back 100 years. Things are just getting worse and worse. And so, I've been an activist here in the state of Utah for 10 years now, pushing for transparency, ending waste, fraud, and abuse. And certainly this issue falls within that area, being that it's tremendously more expensive. So as we looked at this environment and we brought the bill to pass back in 2016, that was the environment. The year prior brought back firing squad, but we brought back this issue to say, this is not what we should be doing here in Utah. And this should not represent the people. This is not what us as a society should be doing. And so I was very excited to see the traction we got that first year. We actually passed that bill out of committee and then fully out of the Utah Senate. And then later out of the House committee, and fell shy moving it forward in the House. Back in 2018, we brought the bill back, and we got it out of the House committee, knowing that the House would be very difficult. And moving forward, we came very close in our vote count, but ultimately fell short in the House. And we've been doing all this work over the last year to garner that support, and I'm feeling very excited about the support we have in the House. A third of our legislature turned over just over a year ago, and as we've been meeting with new representatives in the state, we're seeing more and more the majority of these new reps come in, with a sound mind, fresh ideas, and they really don't support the death penalty. And so I'm feeling very good about our chances here as we move forward with our bill in 2020. And so I see great things on the horizon, especially, like I said, this issue is going to be something that people support for a variety of reasons. Me personally, as a limited government person, absolutely not. But for some people, it is actually the dollars and cents and the fiscal side of it that makes more sense. As we look at Utah alone, Utah has spent $40 million over the last 20 years on the death penalty eligible cases, only to add 2 new people to death row. And if you look at it that way, it's like we spent basically $20 million on each of those cases. As a very fiscally conservative state, how can Utah waste those funds when we could actually be pouring that money into helping victims? We could be pouring that money into our schools. We could actually be pouring it into programs that keep Utahns safe. Thank you very much.
Excellent points. Thank you, Darcy. And lastly, I'm going to go to Kylie Taylor. Kylie, make sure you unmute.
Am I muted? Am I good? Okay. Thanks, Hannah. I'm Kylie Taylor. I am the Wyoming State Coordinator for Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. So I work closely with Representative Olson on this issue in Wyoming. And I feel strongly about ending the death penalty because it aligns perfectly with my conservative beliefs in reducing costs to taxpayers, protecting human life, and guarding the individual against governmental overreach by eliminating the risk of executing innocent people. Conservatives Concerned is going to be working with a large number of conservatives in Wyoming. We have already, who have already voiced their concern on this issue to assist in repeal efforts. We'll be holding events to educate the public about the failures of the death penalty, and working with lawmakers like Representative Olson on proposed legislation for the upcoming session. Wyoming is really unique in the fact that we haven't had anyone executed since 1992. We haven't had anyone on death row in decades, like Representative Olson had already mentioned. So, you know, it doesn't make sense for us to continue to keep this law on the books and to continue to have our taxpayers pay almost $1 million a year just to have this law on the books. I'm really excited to continue this movement in Wyoming and to continue the events that we're having and to see all of the supporters come out. Like Representative Olson said, it's been incredible for me to see that, you know, I'm at the table with the conservative aspect on this issue, but there's so many different individuals and organizations that are in this coalition in Wyoming, from liberals, libertarian, conservative, Republican, Democrat. And so it's been really incredible. And I think that that shows all on its own how important this issue is, because so many different organizations and groups can come together on this issue because we know it's so terrible and that it's a failed big government project. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Kylie. So as you all can see, we've got a really robust list of great people that we're working with across the country. I know you'll enjoy digging into the list and seeing all the names of people who have signed on to the statement of support. We're looking to have a big year next year. Like we've mentioned on this call, Wyoming and Utah and Colorado are all states that have looked very, seem to have good potential for passing repeal within the next year or two. So we'll definitely be heavily involved there. We're seeing amazing traction that we're gaining in states like Ohio and Kentucky, where we haven't started moving bills yet, but we have seen an appetite for that and people really having a reckoning around the problems with the system. So again, we call on the federal government to take note of this, to pay attention to what conservatives are doing and saying across this country and in the states, and to follow suit. We don't need the death penalty. It's a bad, failed big government program, and we hope that this list will make headways on that. So with that, I will now open it up for questions. Like I said, I'll just take a roll call. So if you would like to ask a question, please just give me your name and organization. I'll make a list and then I'll call on each of you individually. Any questions? You might be on mute, so check and make sure you're not on mute if you're trying to get my attention.
For individuals who are on the web, you can unmute yourself by going to your upper right corner and unmuting yourself to ask a question. If you're on the phone, you may also unmute yourself that way. I will also unmute all the lines in a few minutes.
Hi, this is Connor Richards with the Daily Herald. Would it be all right if I ask a question?
Okay.
So my question's for Ms. Van Orden. Are there any differences between the bill that's going to be proposed in 2020 and the one that was proposed in 2018?
So there's a possibility of that. We are still obviously in lots of talks, you know, between legislators and other people involved, stakeholders in this discussion. So we have that as a possibility for sure.
Okay, and if I could just ask you one other question. In Utah, are efforts to end the death penalty very bipartisan, or is it mainly Republicans advocating for this type of thing?
It's actually a very bipartisan issue. That's what I've enjoyed the most about this issue, is that it seems to be an issue that resonates with most Americans. Most Americans know somebody close to them. I wouldn't say somebody on death row, but actually somebody who's been a victim of the criminal justice system as a whole. So as a result, most Americans, I find, are highly skeptical of the criminal justice system. And so as they use that same lens towards the death penalty, as they've seen injustice occur in other areas of people's lives, they also agree that there's absolutely a strong chance of innocent people being on death row. And as a result, people are definitely interested in understanding this issue greater. And that's really what I've come to find, is that as people become educated on this issue, they seem to support repeal. And that's just really the only issue we've come across with the general public, because the general public will, if they are fiscally focused, they'll say, well, a bullet costs 50 cents, and I'm like, well, it doesn't happen that way. And we actually have, you have a long appeals process. Your average person sits on death row for 25 years in Utah, and they're actually more likely to die of natural causes than to be executed. And we have a great example of that just happened here in December. As of December, early December, we had 9 people on death row. Floyd Mesas died of cancer back in December. And so Floyd Mesas, had been on death row for decades. And so once again, you have a situation where it just makes more sense to have life without parole. And I'd also like to bring up about Floyd Mesas. He's an interesting case. Now, he actually, two out of 3 experts testified on his behalf that he was intellectually disabled. So I would actually like to argue that Floyd Mesas, only 1 expert said that he was intellectually strong enough to stand trial. Floyd Mesas constitutionally should not even have been on death row.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is David Fox with KUER. I have another question for Ms. Van Orden, if that's all right.
Okay, sure.
And then for those of the people on the call who aren't from Utah, KUER is NPR Utah. Ms. Van Orden, I'm wondering, since the last 2 bills to repeal the death penalty failed in Utah, to follow up a little bit on what my colleague from the Daily Herald asked, what specifically would give this a better chance of passing in 2020?
Thanks for asking that. Actually, like I mentioned, a third of the Utah legislature turned over. And I would argue with these new freshmen and people in the legislature, we have, I think, newer ways of thinking. As you can imagine, most of our legislature, you have had a lot of people who've been on serving in a legislature for decades, and they did retire. And so it's actually refreshing to see people coming in with new ideas and new ways of thinking. And I am very hopeful as a result, because the majority of people we've come to speak to who are new in the Utah legislature do support repeal.
So to clarify, you're banking on new representation voting differently than what you've seen in the past?
Well, not only that, but we've also had now more time to educate the rest of the legislature on this issue. We've had now several years of talks, sitting down with these legislators year after year, having them meet with exonerees, giving them opportunities to look at new aspects of this issue, which they hadn't seen prior. Utah came out with a greater study about the cost, and that's where we get the $40 million over 20 years. So it's several things that have occurred since we first ran the bill in 2016 that I believe have moved the needle on this issue, not just with our existing legislature.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Stephanie, can you take everyone off mute just in case there's anyone trying to? I think everyone is now unmuted, so I'll ask one last time if there's any other questions. Okay, well, thank you all again for being here. We appreciate your attention on this matter, and please let us know if you have any follow-up questions or if you'd like to talk to any of our people on the call any bit further.